It's time to hand the COVID fines back. Not just because Boris Johnson and Downing Street staff broke the rules, but because the police, it seems, allowed it to happen. Now, I wondered whether or not there could be any way on earth that the police officers at Downing Street didn't know that there was an illegal gathering going on. So I decided to ask yesterday a former police officer on my show, a former police officer who actually used to work at Downing Street. And here's what he had to say.
Agree with that. I would say that that's been a little unkind to them in terms of the fact that if they had strong support behind them, inspector, superintendent, commander level, actually being on call and saying, look, Boris, or frankly, Boris is misbehaving again, because let's face it, he does all sorts of things that are potentially breaching regulations, who would then be prepared to intervene. They might feel perhaps they'll step up to the plate. But on the point of investigating, I think we've got to be careful here that the Metropolitan Police don't end up being dragged into being, if you like, the political referee between people who are understandably howling for the Prime Minister to step aside and people on the other side saying he shouldn't.
So it looks as though they turned a blind eye, really. Now, I personally don't think that these rules should have been in place at all anyway, so I'm not massively bothered about it. But the fact is that the same week that the booze was flowing and the pizza was sizzling in Downing Street, 807 people were fined for breaking COVID rules. In the week between the 15th and the 21st of May 2020, police handed out 807 fixed penalty notices under COVID laws in England and Wales. That's data from the National Police Chiefs Council. At the time, the default fine for breaking the law had been recently raised, actually, from £60 to £100, rising to a maximum of £3,200 for repeat offenders. There was no formal appeal mechanism in place, meaning that anyone wanting to contest a fine had to risk prosecution by refusing to pay. But get this, of some of those brave souls who decided to try it on and risk the prosecution, a third of them were found to be unlawful fines. That's a really high number, isn't it? I was having a look at some of the ridiculous things that people were fined for, right? And I don't think it gets better than this. So 2 divers got into difficulty. Right, there was a massive search and rescue operation launched for them off the coast. We're talking helicopters, lifeboats, a Royal Navy ship, HMS Tyne. After 2 hours of searching, a sailor on the Navy ship spotted a lone diver 3 miles from where he'd entered the water. This bloke, he was freezing. He just survived a near-death experience. He was clinging to life. Anyway, when he was brought back to land, they decided that they were going to treat him. They wrapped one of those foil blankets around him. He was shivering away. And then he was fined for breaking COVID rules. I know, right? This is another one that's insane. As the landlord of a pub, Milnesthorpe Hotel, actually it is, near Pontefract. Anyway, he was fined £1,000 for breaking coronavirus laws in October 2020. Why? Well, because punters leapt up from their seats when Leeds United scored against Manchester City, just as council officials and local police were checking that COVID regulations were being followed in the area. At the time, drinkers were only allowed to remain seated in groups of no more than 6. A man was fined for eating a kebab in his car at Cheddar Gorge. One woman said in May 2020 she often went to Kensington Park Gardens for her permitted exercise. On one afternoon, she said a Met police officer was patrolling the park from a car and shouted at her for leaning forwards on her stationary bicycle whilst reading a book. She told the Mail Online, "Well, I told him I was just resting," and he shouted, "No, you're not, you're reading." Not willing to equate the two, he then yelled, "I'm not going to sit here arguing with you, move." But all this joking aside, right, this is the way the police were behaving towards ordinary people. It's bully boy tactics and egregious fines. It's like the Stasi. The police were able to track down a woman who travelled to a 97-year-old mother's care home, which had COVID in the site, in the place, pull the car into a service station and arrest her, right, before taking her mum back to the care home. The fact is that whilst these fines were being dished out to people, there was cheese and wine on the go in Downing Street, and the police were unable to detect any of that, were they? Both those in Downing Street and the police collectively have the power to hand the public's fines back. And I think they should exercise that power. I do think it was interesting yesterday that Keir Starmer didn't really go after Boris too much for actually breaking the rules. He went after him more for lying. Why is that? Could it be that Starmer himself broke the rules? Mark Drakeford in Wales, he's been filmed breaking the rules. Look at the media. Kay Burley, Beth Rigby. They've got a bit of a nerve having a pop at Boris after their little party, haven't they? Peston was videoed massless in Downing Street at a press conference. Nobody's squeaky clean. Nobody got the rules 100% right 100% of the time. Boris Johnson kind of apologised a bit yesterday, didn't he? But the fact is, this has gone down incredibly badly with many people. It's had cut through, actually. Sometimes, just sometimes, when you're apologising, a gesture can be a good way to go, can't it? Handing people's COVID fines back would be a pretty good gesture.